The tennis world was stunned when Rafael Nadal picked up a racket once again. 1 year after saying goodbye to professional tennis, the 22-time Grand Slam champion returned to the court at his academy in Mallorca, creating a moment that instantly captured the attention of fans around the globe. But what made the scene even more remarkable was the player standing across the net. It wasn't a former rival. It wasn't a Spanish star. And it wasn't a fellow Grand Slam champion. It was Alex Eala, the young Filipina who had arrived at the Rafa Nadal Academy as a teenager with a dream and had grown into one of the brightest rising stars in women's tennis. Within hours, videos from the practice session spread across social media. Millions watched. Millions shared. And millions were reminded of how much they missed seeing Rafael Nadal on a tennis court. Yet the most unforgettable moment wasn't a spectacular winner or a breathtaking rally. It was a smile. A genuine laugh from Rafael Nadal. The same Nadal who had built his legendary career on relentless intensity, fierce determination, and unwavering focus. For decades, opponents had struggled to break his concentration. But during one light-hearted exchange, Alex Eala managed to do something few players ever had. She made the King of Clay laugh. The clip instantly went viral. Fans around the world couldn't stop talking about it. Because they weren't just watching a retired champion hit tennis balls. They were witnessing something much deeper. A rare glimpse into the relationship between one of the greatest players in tennis history and one of the sport's most exciting young talents. Mallorca, Spain. November 2025. Exactly 1 year had passed since Rafael Nadal played the final match of his historic career at the Davis Cup Finals. It was an emotional farewell that marked the end of an era. After decades of excellence, countless records, and 22 Grand Slam titles, Nadal had stepped away from professional competition. Since then, his focus had shifted toward family, his charitable foundation, and the academy that carries his name. The daily grind of professional tennis was behind him. The battles, the pressure, the sacrifices. They had all become part of history. Or so everyone thought. Because on a quiet day in Mallorca, something unexpected happened. Rafael Nadal walked back onto a tennis court. And waiting for him on the other side of the net was Alex Eala. What happened next would capture the attention of the entire tennis world. For the past year, Rafael Nadal had focused on a different chapter of his life. His family, his foundation, and the academy that had become one of his greatest contributions to the future of tennis. Professional competition was over. The endless travel, the pressure of Grand Slam battles, and the physical demands of the tour were now memories. But on this particular day in Mallorca, something felt different. Inside the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, Nadal laced up his shoes, wrapped his fingers, picked up a racket, and stepped onto the clay court once again. This wasn't a comeback. It wasn't an exhibition. And it certainly wasn't the beginning of another professional chapter. Instead, it was a celebration. A celebration of the sport he loves. A celebration of the academy he built. And a celebration of the young players carrying his legacy forward. Waiting on the other side of the net was Alex Eala. The young Filipina had first arrived at the academy years earlier as a teenager chasing an ambitious dream. Far from home and surrounded by talented players from around the world, she embraced the values that define the Nadal philosophy: discipline, humility, resilience, and relentless hard work. Although she had graduated from the academy, Mallorca had never stopped feeling like home. And on this day, she would share the court with the man whose example had inspired so much of her journey. For Eala, the experience was unforgettable. Training with Rafael Nadal was something young tennis players around the world could only dream about. But for her, it had become reality. Every rally felt special. Every exchange carried meaning. And every moment on court was another reminder of how far she had come. After the session, Nadal shared a video from the practice on social media. His message was warm and simple. It felt great to be back on a tennis court. And it had been a pleasure sharing the court with Alex Eala. The response was immediate. Within hours, the clips had spread across the tennis world. Fans who had spent a year wondering if they would ever see Nadal with a racket again suddenly had a reason to smile. Millions watched as the two left-handers exchanged smooth baseline rallies, moving effortlessly across the clay with remarkable rhythm. But what captured people's attention wasn't just the quality of the tennis. It was Nadal himself. He looked relaxed, comfortable, happy. There were smiles. There were jokes. And there was a playful side of the Spanish legend that fans rarely saw during his fiercely competitive career. For a moment, the pressure and intensity that had defined 2 decades of greatness seemed to disappear. What remained was simply a love for the game. And then came the moment that everyone would remember. There were plenty of memorable moments during the practice session. But one exchange stood out above all the others. In the middle of a lively rally, Alex Eala spotted an opening and unleashed a beautifully angled forehand that pulled Nadal completely out of position. The shot was perfectly placed. Even the king of clay couldn't reach it. As the point ended, Eala couldn't hide her excitement. She raised her arms, ran forward with a smile, and celebrated the winner with the enthusiasm of a player enjoying every second of a dream moment. What happened next instantly captured the attention of tennis fans around the world. Rafael Nadal laughed. Not a quick smile. Not a polite grin. A genuine, wholehearted laugh. He threw his head back and simply enjoyed the moment. For a player whose career had been defined by relentless focus, fierce competitiveness, and unwavering intensity, it was a rare and refreshing sight. The cameras caught everything. Within hours, clips of the exchange spread across social media, generating thousands of reactions from fans across the globe. People weren't just talking about the shot. They were talking about Nadal's reaction. Many described it as a side of the Spanish legend they rarely had the chance to see during his playing career. For more than 2 decades, Nadal had become synonymous with determination. The famous cries of "Vamos!", the clenched fists, the laser-sharp concentration, the refusal to surrender a single point. Those qualities helped transform him into one of the greatest champions in sports history. That is why seeing him laugh so freely on a tennis court felt so special. For a brief moment, the fierce competitor disappeared. What remained was simply a man enjoying the game he had loved since childhood. And for Alex Eala, the moment carried even deeper meaning. Years earlier, she had arrived at the Rafa Nadal Academy as a young teenager with a racket, a dream, and an ambition to compete with the best players in the world. Since then, she had spent countless hours learning not only tennis technique but also the values that define Nadal's success. Discipline, humility, resilience, hard work. Now, she wasn't just watching her idol from a distance. She was sharing the court with him, competing with him, laughing with him, creating memories that would stay with her forever. For Eala, it was more than a practice session. It was a powerful reminder of how far her journey had taken her. And for tennis fans around the world, it was a glimpse into a unique bond between a legendary champion and one of the brightest young stars carrying the future of the sport forward. For Alex Eala, that moment of laughter was more than just a viral clip. It was the result of a relationship that had been built over years. Long before she became one of the most talked about young players in women's tennis, Eala was a teenager from the Philippines arriving in Mallorca with a dream and a determination to succeed. Far from home and surrounded by talented players from around the world, she embraced the values that define the Rafa Nadal Academy. Discipline, humility, resilience, relentless hard work. Day after day, year after year, she absorbed the mindset that had helped transform Rafael Nadal into one of the greatest champions in sports history. And over time, Nadal began to notice. He watched her development. He followed her progress. And he celebrated her achievements as she climbed the professional ranks. As Eala's results grew bigger, so did the support from her mentor. When she produced breakthrough performances on the WTA Tour, Nadal was among the first to acknowledge her success. Whenever she reached a new milestone, the Academy and its founder proudly shared in the moment. What makes their relationship special is that it extends far beyond tennis. Eala has often spoken about the qualities she admires most in Nadal. Not the trophies, not the records. Not even the Grand Slam titles. But the person behind them. Despite achieving more than almost anyone in the history of the sport, Nadal has remained humble, approachable, and willing to help others. Those are the lessons that left the deepest impression on Eala. Because greatness is not measured only by victories. It is measured by character. And few athletes have represented that better than Rafael Nadal. During the practice session, Nadal continued doing what mentors do best. He observed. He encouraged. And he shared small pieces of advice that could help Eala continue improving her game. The suggestions may have seemed minor to outsiders. But coming from a 22-time Grand Slam champion, every detail mattered. For Eala, it was another opportunity to learn from someone who had spent decades competing at the highest level of the sport. For Nadal, it was a chance to see the progress of a player whose journey he had watched from the very beginning. And perhaps that was the most meaningful part of the entire day. This wasn't simply a legend practicing with a rising star. It was a mentor sharing the court with one of the Academy's greatest success stories. A player who had arrived with a dream. And who was now proving that dream could become reality. Throughout the practice session, Nadal wasn't just hitting balls back and forth. He was actively coaching. Offering small corrections. Sharing subtle technical insights that only a player of his experience could recognize. According to Eala, Nadal gave her brief advice on her forehand and a few other aspects of her game during the session. They weren't dramatic changes. They were fine details. But in tennis, especially at the highest level, small adjustments often make the biggest difference. For Eala, every word carried weight. Not because it was complicated, but because it came from someone who had mastered the sport over decades at the very top. The academy itself highlighted the significance of the moment. In a post shared on its official channels, the Rafa Nadal Academy described the session as a special occasion, emphasizing the joy of seeing Nadal back on court, sharing his experience and passion with players he has helped develop. For Eala, the day felt like a full-circle moment. She had first arrived in Mallorca as a wide-eyed teenager from the Philippines, uncertain of what the future held but determined to improve. Years later, she returned not as a student trying to find her place, but as a professional on the WTA Tour, standing across the net from her mentor as an established top-level player. That transformation reflected not only her talent, but also the environment she had grown up in. A system built on discipline, patience, and belief. As the tennis world celebrated the emotional scenes from Mallorca, another storyline began to emerge around the moment. The reaction from players at the very top of the game. Among them was Aryna Sabalenka. The world number one has often spoken about her admiration for Rafael Nadal, describing him as one of the athletes she respects most in all of sport. Even for champions at her level, Nadal's presence carries a unique weight. There is the history, the achievements, and the aura built over years of dominance on the biggest stages. Sabalenka herself has admitted in interviews that competing in environments where Nadal was present once made her unusually aware of his presence, even as a fellow Grand Slam champion. It is a reminder of how deeply his legacy runs through the sport, and how even the best players in the world can still feel like fans in certain moments. Yet while the wider tennis world reacted to the viral practice session, Nadal's attention remained exactly where it had always been in recent years. On development, on mentorship, and on the players coming through his academy system. On Alex Eala. Because from the very beginning of her journey in Mallorca, he had seen something in her growth that stood out. Not just results, but mentality, work ethic, and the ability to carry herself like a professional long before she officially became one. And that, more than anything else, is what made the moment in Mallorca feel so significant. Not a farewell, not a comeback, but a continuation of something that had been building for almost a decade. On the anniversary of his retirement, Rafael Nadal stepped back onto the court at his academy and shared a practice session with Alex Eala. It was a moment that symbolized continuity rather than return. A champion passing on experience. A mentor investing in the next generation. And a young player continuing a journey that began nearly a decade earlier in Mallorca. Throughout the session, Nadal offered encouragement, guidance, and recognition for Eala's progress on the professional tour. For him, it was not about headlines or spectacle, but about development and growth within the environment he built. Eala, meanwhile, continued to establish herself as one of the most promising young players in the sport, building on years of training at the Rafa Nadal Academy and translating that foundation onto the WTA Tour. As the video from Mallorca spread across social media, it naturally drew reactions from across the tennis world. Among those watching closely were top players who understood what it meant to train alongside or be acknowledged by a figure like Nadal. Aryna Sabalenka, like many of her peers, has often expressed admiration for Nadal's career and the standard he set in professional tennis. Moments involving him regularly capture attention even among current champions, reflecting the lasting influence he continues to have on the sport. But within this broader reaction, the focus of Nadal himself remained unchanged. His attention was on the players he has helped develop, on the academy he founded, and on athletes like Alex Eala, whose progress represents the long-term vision of that system. Over the years, Eala's growth has been steady and deliberate. From a young scholarship player arriving in Mallorca to a professional competing on the WTA Tour, her journey reflects consistency, discipline, and adaptation to the highest standards of the sport. What makes this connection stand out is not comparison or rivalry, but continuity. Nadal represents the foundation. Eala represents the next chapter emerging from it. A left-handed player shaped by the same principles of effort, resilience, and competitive discipline that defined her mentor's career. And in that sense, the practice session in Mallorca was not about replacing an era. It was about extending its influence into the future of the game. Eala's game is often described as a blend of intelligence, patience, and defensive resilience. But those around the Rafa Nadal Academy also point to something less tangible. A competitive fire. A refusal to give up on points, even under pressure. A mentality that mirrors the qualities Nadal himself displayed during his rise in the sport. According to coaches within the academy system, that mindset is not something that can simply be taught. It is either present or it isn't. And in Eala's case, it became increasingly visible throughout her development. By the 2025 season, her progress was no longer gradual, it was decisive. She climbed from outside the top 100 into the top 50 within a year, marking one of the most significant breakthroughs in her career. Along the way, she recorded standout wins over established Grand Slam champions and established herself as one of the most improved players on the WTA Tour. It was a season that signaled transition. From prospect to contender. From developing talent to established professional. As she prepared for the next stage of her career, including the Australian Open, the Miami Open, the clay season, and Roland Garros, the foundation built in Mallorca continued to shape her approach to the game. In her own words, the recent experience of training alongside Nadal